Michael Wolf's photos express what fascinates me about China or Chinese cities and what has been the focus of my research for over 20 years.
Yes, and we will see how far this sharing of the same interest leads us in talking about this book. Friederike, let me shortly introduce you as an urban anthropologist. You have been working on everyday urban life in Peking in the 90s as an ethnographic study for your PhD that you received from CUNY. Today you are a professor for urban anthropology at Bogotá, Universidad de los Andes in Colombia. You are a real expert in housing and everyday life in megacities, I would say. And at first sight, this could really be the link between your research interests and that of Michael Wolf, who not only worked intensely on the built and lived environment in Hong Kong, like here, but also in Chicago or Tokyo.
Yes, the density in this almost claustrophobic living environment that these photos show, the scale and the uniformity, that's very much reflective of what interests me about cities, large and mega cities especially. My question was always, how is it to live in these places, to live in a place like this, for example? Who and what is behind these facades? But also, how did these buildings come about, and why? Why is it that we see this kind of construction in a specific place in a specific time? So it's the intersection between the built form, architecture, the urban morphology, and people's everyday lives. And I think this latter aspect of the everyday life also becomes evident in these photos. They are from Hong Kong. This book is based on a series done in Hong Kong, but my research has been on mainland China. And so the fascinating thing for me is also to see how much of this is very reflective and very similar to what I know from mainland China, but then also to ask what are the differences that I can also see. And that again leads to the question, why is there a difference? Why is there similarity? And so, for example, one of the differences is that the older buildings that I know from mainland China are different from the ones portrayed here from Hong Kong. And so in that sense, we also have, exactly, these are older buildings. So we have a time scale that Wolf introduces into this series and this book. And again, so that leads then to the question, what are the economic and political circumstances that make a building look like this in a specific point of time and locale. Mm-hmm. And so in mainland China, of course, the context is Maoism and the mm-hmm. reforms that only started really to take off in the mm-hmm. 1990s, which then make it economy in the political context more similar to something in Hong Kong. And that's how we can see why the construction becomes more similar.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's really interesting to discover how the book organizes difference while, of course, working on the subject of uniformity. By the way, we are looking at the second edition by Peperoni Books and Asia One Books from 2012. It was first published in 2009, and the pictures are from between 2003 and 2008. I would say that at first, after these pages of plain facade pictures, one is led to look closer, to search for difference in these surfaces. And when then the city is revealed as a social space, to beyond the two-dimensional surface, we recognize some of its depth, like here, for instance. It becomes three-dimensional.
Yes, it's almost as if Wolf appears to zoom in on this question of what is behind the walls that he portrayed here in the beginning. Towards the inside, the more private. And even though at first sight these facades appear so anonymous, so lifeless, then in these pictures we can find the signs of life. Plants, laundry, and I can almost hear the bird cages that Chinese people always hang in these balconies. I feel like I hear the birds singing. And especially these balconies are really interesting in this picture because they become this point between the inside the apartment and the facade, the outside, between the private and public. And in Chinese context, and that appears to be something shared in Hong Kong and the mainland, it's a very important space because of the lack of living space. Mm-hmm. People glass them in very often and use them really as an additional room. So in summer, for example, they sleep on the balcony because of the heat, and in winter they store their natural produce there as a natural fridge.
Yes, and these arrangements with density, with the lack of space, the interesting, somehow also provocative relations between private and public, are the subject of another book series, one has to say. Here we have one of these books, Hong Kong Storage. Is this the street level that is even closer to how you are studying the megacity?
Yes, I mean, in a way that relates very much to what interests me about urban life. These photos show these details of urban life, many surprising, strange, quirky, and really these photos make me smile. They reflect so much what fascinated me about China from the very beginning when I first went to China. These very mundane details of daily life, of everyday life, that in a way you could find everywhere, but then they seem so full of questions and mystery almost. Mm-hmm. It's like, why are these rubber boots there? Who was the person who put them there? What's behind this photo? What's the story? And so I find them really fascinating, these photos, because so often when we think of cultural differences, we think of strange costumes, different architectural styles. But in a way, I find these much more interesting because it's something we know. We know what is a rubber boot or bucket. But then it's also strange because I don't think we would find this kind of arrangement in Germany. So that's then leads to the question again, why is this arranged in this way? What's behind this? What's going on?
Yeah, it's also about a secure place where you can leave your scissors, but also a very controlled place, isn't
yes.
it? So in Architecture of Density, the book we're mainly talking about, we are slowly led to look for the everyday within or through these facades or surfaces. That's somehow the internal conceptual approach of the book. And besides these zoom-ins, it is the different phases of construction that one reveals from page to page. So some sort of chronological concept. But for me, the most interesting, at least, are these hints to construction practices. And when I went through the book the first time, it was here that I finally understood what he showed us about construction before. And I will go back to it. Here, for instance. What about construction?
Yes, construction, or the practice and the different factors behind construction contributing to construction. That's also a very fascinating topic really to explore because it's such a basic worldwide practice. But in these photos, exactly as you say, we can see the complexity and also the local aspects of construction. So, for example, in these pictures, the bamboo scaffolding, which you can see all over Asia. It's so beautiful in its fragility, but at the same time we know that it's a very sturdy material to use in this kind of scaffolding. So it appears almost anachronistic to the scale, to this brutality of this construction. And I think also the sequencing of the photos in the book with the different phases of construction drives home the scale of construction as a practice.
And here we have signs for construction workers, as you told me. Yeah, there's construction, that's a huge subject in this book. But there is industrial production too, and I will go to the index. Because here in this index, where you have all the pictures in a smaller format, you have some hints to what it is about. And here we see, first we didn't really know when we looked at there up in the book and in the beginning, we didn't really know what it was. Here we understood it is industry, and of course here it's written. So this is also a subject. How do you work with photography in your research? Because here we are somehow in a research section, if you want so.
I do take photographs, on the one hand, as a visual reminder for myself in my research, something to trigger my memories when I recall what's going on. Often these are of architecture, exactly like this, of structural aspects that are important to the specific project. On the other hand, I also use them to document a place that might then be included in a publication, etc., of people also, of situations. Another use of photography, which I find interesting, is as a tool in a conversation with an informant, with an interlocutor, to generate or make them tell me about what is going on or what do they associate with something, for example. So it's different aspects. I also use them a lot in talks and conferences because it's, of course, one of the prime manners or ways to bring closer a place that is often seems to be far away, where people haven't been, and to share this kind of, or overcome this element of the unknown. At the same time, I have to say that over the years I've become a little more hesitant to use photograph or to take them myself, because I don't want to exotize poverty and neglect, for example.
Page, because there it's really obvious.
Because that's very often part of my research, and so if you take a photograph, there's always this danger of exotizing poverty, for example.
Like here, we found
Exactly,
this really.
yes. At the same time, in China, for example, there was always the advantage that people often asked me actually to take a picture of me, and then I just kind of turned this around and asked them to take a picture together. So that's a way of overcoming this element of power, but I'm quite conscious of power, representation, and also what's left out of the picture. I mean, what is around here, we don't know, and so that is, of course, the power of the picture and representation also, which I think we do have to be aware of. So in a way, I'm maybe suspicious of photos, you could say.
I wanted to go back to this beautiful, where is it? Here, again, a construction site picture. You told me that buildings have these names, like here, Palazzo,
Yes.
and people associate their belonging to these names. Could you explain that a little bit?
Yes, this is it's a great photo, and very much reflective of what's going on in China. Palazzo, I mean, at least at this point, it doesn't associate Palazzo anything palace-like, this photo. I don't know so much about Hong Kong, but in mainland China, the names are really important for people when they buy property. It's mainly the middle class, but even poorer people have this kind of identification of a place and a name of the place. And it has a lot to do that in mainland China, class was, at least as a concept, eradicated during Maoism. And now in the reform period, people start again to distinguish themselves from each other, and so they kind of construct their new identities. And a large part of this construction of their identity is to buy property and to identify with the style that this property represents. And so some people might tell you, I buy an apartment in a building called Palazzo because I like Italy. And another person buys a place in a building called Eternal Harmony because I'm a serene person. So they really incorporate that in their personal new identity construction, the names of the buildings. And also behind it, I find it very interesting that in China, the character for family, jia in Mandarin pronunciation, is the same for house and family. So that also shows how important this connection between family and the house is.
That's interesting. It sounds like a scaling device, this culture, meaning between these huge buildings and structures and the intimacy and how people relate to it. So here in the end of the book, we have somehow a depiction of the perspective, the position also of the photographer. At least it looks like it should be that. And although the whole book is somehow very much about conceptual approaches, Wolf is quoted here in the book as someone who has a very intuitive approach to photography, and that this is really what he likes. He spent a lot of time in Hong Kong. I think he still lives there. What would be your picture that depicts your ethnographic position as an urban ethnographer? Would it be here?
I think that would be part of my position, or if I would say a photo that represents my approach towards urban ethnography. But I guess it would be in a way a combined picture, part of this and with the other series
and
together.
We try it out. We find a really
Exactly.
dense one.
This, but then also this kind of detail, combining the two.
What comes up.
Exactly.
So this
would be representative maybe of what my approach to urban ethnography is.
So the street level and of course the perspective on also the global economy
exactly.
of building.
Yes, very much so.
So we will see if Wolf makes a book like that.
That would be fabulous.
Thank you, Friederike.
Thank you.